Good morning, good morning. Welcome to Q&A with Felicia and Debra. Delightful to have you all here with us this morning, and thank you for your patience. I was just joking with Felicia, it's like, why does this happen on Mondays, the fourth Monday of every month, where I have technical difficulties? And so it's start getting ready at 22 and something happens. So anyway, so appreciate your patience and thank you so much for joining us. So welcome, I'm Dr. Debra Dupree, facilitating this month's Q&A with Felicia Amenta. So we're delighted to have you all here and to get going. Now, a couple of things. We are destined to go about 45 minutes. And so we want to be respectful of your time. And we do encourage you to place any questions you might have into the chat box because this is being recorded. And for those of you who've participated before, you know that we do send a follow-up recording, in post-event. And therefore, if you have specific questions that either we answer or may not have time to answer, then we have an opportunity to do that in the post-event follow-up. And so with that, Felicia, welcome.
Yes, welcome, Debra. It's my pleasure to be here.
Wonderful, great. Well, as our participants should know, is that there are three key topics that we want to cover today. One is already at the federal level, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission has filed a lawsuit against an employer around the failure to accommodate. And so this particular case is the first, I think, of a series to come. And so we thought it'd be a really good opportunity to talk about, well, what are some of the nuances of this case in terms of what did the employer do that worked well, and what did they not do that didn't work so well, and then what ultimately led to this filing. And the EEOC does this at times to make a case, make a point. And so I think there are lessons to be learned from this, and that all of us can be mindful of as we help, our districts, our people of our organizations, and certainly the employees with medical conditions navigate through this process. So that's the first one. Then OSHA has already started taking action by conducting on-site evaluations, investigations, and citations. And so Felicia is going to help us dive more into that as well. And then we thought we'd wrap it up by turning specifically to the IPM process, because there have been a lot of questions recently as far as, workers' compensation settlements and what to do and what not to do. And in light of the ADA and there's always a mix between the laws. When it's a work-related injury, we still fall first and foremost under the federal and state guidelines for the interactive process. And certainly they apply to non-work related, but there seems to be a lot of confusion when they're work related. And also we thought we'd address a little bit, if we have time, if not, we'll roll it over to next time, what to do when you have a resistant employee to the interactive process. And so with that, let's get going. Okay. And so, Felicia, I think I brought to your attention, along with a bunch of other people, the latest in the EEOC. And why don't you give us participants some highlights about what that entails? And I'm going to try to pull it up and share some specific things as well.
Okay, great. So the EEOC filed their first pandemic-related remote work bias. And this lawsuit was filed by the EEOC, an ADA lawsuit, in October. So this is the most recent case, and so I thought it would be really interesting to talk about it today. And the EEOC charged the company with terminating a woman with a pulmonary condition after refusing to accommodate her disability. So those are the charges, but I wanted to talk a little bit about the specifics, Debra, because I think they're interesting for our kind of what happens in our education space. So because of the pandemic, the employees, and this was in Georgia, in the US in Georgia, they were working remotely 4 days a week from March until June of 2020. So that's kind of the background setting on what was happening. Ironically enough, this employee she worked as a health and safety manager, which is a nice twist to that. So she was actually in charge of all the COVID regulations. So she had been working remotely and since March, and in June when COVID started. In June of 2020, the company reopened and she was told that she needed to return to work 5 days a week and there was no more remote work, right? And then she responded with a request to accommodate. She wanted to work remotely 2 days a week. And then on the 3 that she came to work, she wanted to take frequent breaks while she was working on site due to her condition. And her respiratory condition is an underlying non-industrial condition that causes her to have difficulty breathing and places her at greater risk of COVID. And that's basically what the note said from the doctor. So the background for this company, this employer, they did allow other employees to work remotely, but they denied her request to work remotely. And shortly thereafter, they fired her. So, and then
Felicia?
Yes.
If I can interject, if I recall too, as part of the firing, they started documenting her performance.
Yes.
And so made it a performance-based issue
Yes.
as well, when she'd been no prior counseling, no prior
Right.
evidence of any kind of performance issues,
Correct.
except regarding around her request for continued remote work, and not even full-time. Again, remember, part-time.
Right, hybrid. So then the EEOC filed a lawsuit charging that the company violated the ADA. They are seeking back pay, compensatory damages, punitive damages, and injunctive relief. And that's the litigation that's going on. And because that lawsuit was just filed in October, we'll be watching that closely, right, Deborah, to see what happens with that and how that works through. But there were several interesting things I thought that would be good for our environment. This was not a request from her to work remotely 5 days a week. This was hybrid work. And it doesn't go into the background on why they said no. Right, the company refused to comment in this article, so I wasn't able to get any insight from the employers on why did they say no. And one of the things that really harmed them with the EEOC is they had done this for other people. The very request that she had asked for, there were other employees that were doing that with underlying medical conditions. So
yeah, and I think one of the big things, for our participants to be mindfully aware of is that one of the other points, as I recall from the article, that the EEOC was saying, wait a minute, maybe you were forced to go into remote work with the onset of COVID, but you've demonstrated your ability to function as an organization, to get the work done. And in many cases, as we're seeing in other articles, companies have actually been profiting more with these remote work conditions than they have before. And that's why employees are starting to sort of stand up and demand more, because wait a minute, we've already shown our ability to work remotely. You've even profited from it. And now you're saying we have to come back to work all at the same time, every day, 5 days a week. It's like, it doesn't make sense. And that's one of the big points the EEOC has made in this case too, is you've already proven your ability to function as an organization. This employee has proven her ability to perform all the essential functions of the job to level performance required. And because of the underlying conditions, she's just requesting an opportunity to continue working remotely 2 days a week. And so, and they said, we're going to push you on this one.
So more to come, but it's an interesting case, right? Because I know even from the questions that I get, that districts and employers that we work with face this similar situation quite a bit. Different, every case is based on its own merits and its own facts. So I want to clarify that. We look at each and every case. This is just a case to look at and just make sure you're being really careful with your reasoning for your decisions.
Yeah. And I would add to that too, is that, you've already emphasized it. I'm going to emphasize it again. Case by case evaluation. Just because you have in the past doesn't mean it's an automatic given, and that needs to be made known to the employee as well. And that we're always taking things into consideration in terms of the impact on business operations. I just had an IPM last week who said, well, I feel I can do my work. It's like, well, that's great. Your motivation and dedication is wonderful. And yet, because of what condition you have, there's a duty on the part of the employer to ensure that you can work safely without further risk of harm or injury to yourself. And that's what this conversation is about. And, and are you truly delivering, the services to the students as needed? Are they get the quality of education that they deserve? And so, because we were able to look at it on a temporary basis, it was agreed that there would be some offset, shall we say, to get her back to work. And there's also a shortage. And so, but one of the things I think that, it's been emphasized in some offshoots of that particular article, Felicia, is that the Job Accommodation Network has come out to say, what, EEOC has advocated remote work as a form of accommodation if it makes sense for the business entity and fits the needs of the employee. And so remote work has been advocated long before COVID ever started. And so I know there is a goal of employers to get everyone back to work, and yet even that has to be evaluated on a case-by-case basis these days.
Right. Yeah. Whether it makes sense in that individual case with those individual facts.
Yeah. So this is something to be mindful of. We'll continue to bring up any updates to our monthly Q&A and certainly put the word out if any new developments occur. But these cases can take quite a long time. And I quite honestly anticipate that we will be seeing more filings among employers who may draw a hard line. And when they say absolutely no, and frankly, I just did a series of articles on the hybrid workplace for Disability Management Employers Coalition this last month. And employers, whether or not they're dealing with employees with medical conditions, are grappling with this whole hybrid work environment, both on the pros as well as on the cons. Just because employees, like I said, they're calling the Great Resignation or the Great Retirement. Employees are resisting the usual way of working conditions and pay because of what has been demonstrated over the last year and a half. So we're really having to rethink and reimagine our worlds of work in so many ways.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
Yeah. Well, again, if we have any questions that come up about that, we'll be happy to answer them. But I'd like to go ahead and shift, Felicia, to really learn more about what is OSHA doing. They are already out in the workplace, already doing investigations and already issuing citations. So what do you see on that front?
So I can't speak to any specific, obviously, districts of but we have seen OSHA out. They have been doing inspections more recently, I'll say, in the last maybe 6 to 9 months. I do encourage everyone to work with their safety team and their loss control team from the risk management and HR perspective to make sure that sort of preemptively make sure that you have everything that they're going to pull and that they're going to look at. But we have seen some citations in our own district, our own employer members. But I also looked at a few examples, Deborah, that I thought might be helpful of actual examples. And these are nationwide, but they still give us an idea of what OSHA is looking at. So what you want to try to do is incorporate, what's happening with the OSHA sent its emergency temporary standard to the White House for review on October 12th, 21. And we have not seen a response on those yet, but new rules will soon take effect. And so obviously this is preemptive and we want to kind of get ready for that. As employers, you need to incorporate any new standards into your policies and practices. And obviously failing to comply can put employers in danger of liability as OSHA's increasing its workplace scrutiny, because we kind of know that. I kind of looked at the Department of Labor and OSHA's potential fines, and there's a few examples. There was an auto insurance agency that was fined for exposing workers to COVID-19. And in this particular case, they were found to have ignored coronavirus safety requirements. They allowed the employees displaying symptoms that were symptomatic to continue to work in a Denver office where an employee had died from COVID. They started an investigation, OSHA did, following a whistleblower complaint. So one of the employees complained, obviously, and then OSHA's found that they'd failed to safely distance employees. They didn't implement their COVID safety plan, and they allowed symptomatic workers to remain on site and didn't quarantine them. And they face more than $23,000 in proposed penalties. The second example that I found was a healthcare facility in Bloomington that was cited for failure to protect workers from the virus. The complaint stated that they didn't ensure proper use of N95 masks, which is a type of respirator, nor did it fit test all of its employees to ensure, because that mask has got to have a proper seal around your face. And they face more than $83,000 in proposed fines. And what OSHA's comments there was that an employer must ensure an N95 mask or respirator fit correctly and maintain a face-to-face piece seal to ensure that they protect their users from spreading an infectious disease. And what the OSHA director said, in quotes, after more than a year of fighting the pandemic, employers should know the procedures to minimize workers' risks of exposure and take every precaution. So, you know, that's the cautionary tale there. And the third incident that I thought was kind of interesting is a separate incident that was at a health and rehab center, and which was found not to have implemented a hazard assessment process to evaluate for potential COVID-19 exposure, specifically that they failed to track the vaccination status of their employees. They had no system to do that. They didn't erect any barriers or maintain 6 feet distance between their employees. And very unfortunately, an employee died in their facility in June of 2020 from the virus. And they also face fines from OSHA. So that kind of gives us an idea of what they're looking at and where they're going. And certainly with our members, at least in the JPA pool, we do have 3 loss control people who are experts in safety and IIP plans and the COVID safety plans. I am not. And before OSHA ever visits, you should have a visit with them, sort of a checkup, as you will. I call it like a tune-up, and make sure that if OSHA did come, you're ready. You have everything documented. You don't want to have them get there and then find out that you don't have all your safety plans up to date. These employers obviously were not ready, right? And had not been following everything. And those fines, as we saw, can be costly.
Yes. A few programs at least, right? Yeah. So just to reiterate, in case people don't know, is that how often is it recommended that their safety plans be updated?
I know that the loss control team recommends that you do it every year at minimum, but certainly if your COVID plan hasn't been looked at in a year, you definitely want to sit down with loss control, and they will come out and kind of do a sort of an OSHA pre-site check. And they'll come and ask for everything, because they know, they work with OSHA so much, they know what they're going to ask. They know exactly what's going to happen when they come.
Okay, great. And you know, I know that we have had an influx of a lot of new people in their positions this year.
Yes.
And so how about sharing how best to reach the loss control team?
So the best way, you can reach out to me and I can put you in touch. We have 3 loss control team and we divide them up between the districts. If you're not a member of our pool, then we recommend that you reach out to your pool, and whether you have loss control services free or whether you pay for that, we recommend that you do that with either your M&O or your maintenance and safety team, so that you're ready.
Okay. And my experience with OSHA in the past is that they can come anytime, any place. And so, you know, thinking that, every September I should update my plan may not work.
So the districts, they have come to some of our districts in the county, as some of our members, and there's been no warning, right? They just show up and there have been fines levied. So so our loss control team also is aware of that and is working with that because our loss control team works with our members and OSHA to try to minimize the fines because you can appeal those fines and you can discuss those fines. So they kind of know the areas that they're concentrating on and focusing on. But these three cases give you an example, right, of the kind of things they're looking at, right? Social distancing, your COVID plans got to be implemented. You have to have barriers up. You need to be, you know, cleaning and maintaining the distance. And so it kind of, and certainly when people are ill, you've got to have a way of that you're very strict about that and sending people home.
Okay. Okay. Great. Great. And again, just for benefit of our participants today, is what is the latest on social distancing? I know we've gone, you know, started with 6 feet and then down to 3 feet. And so what are the practices these days?
Well, I certainly with our school districts, this I won't speak to everyone, right? You know, just because everybody's doing things a little bit different. So try to defer to each district's safety plans and what they're doing. But for the most part, our school districts are maintaining the mask wearing indoors, and certainly most of the districts are, you know, the mask outdoors. They have a different. We're doing things a little differently than LA Unified and some of the others.
Yeah. I had a couple of things I want to say. So one is to you know, if you're not sure, those of you who are on the Q&A today, check back with those in charge of your COVID plan and do a review, call loss control, and get it checked out and making sure, because again, what I'm hearing you say then, Felicia, is that you may get fined on the spot because that's what they do, but you have the recourse to then appeal the fines assessed if you show, let's say, perhaps you were in progress of updating it or something like that. I'm sure there are a number of factors that can be considered, and loss control can advise the JPA participants further on that, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And I'm reluctant, you know, Deborah, I'm reluctant to answer on district by district, because we just in our program, in our pool, we have 66 different members, and some of them even follow stricter than the guidance. And that's why I'm deferring to everyone's policies on what they're doing.
Yeah. And I would also emphasize or add, I was recently in Riverside County for some events, and also Imperial County. And we already know LA County is much more conservative than San Diego County. Riverside County is also much more conservative. To go to something, I had to register my vaccine card on ClearPass. They don't even want to handle your paper vaccination cards. They want it electronic, and then they can QR scan code it and so forth. I don't know if a lot of people are even aware of that's happening. But that will supposedly afford you the opportunity to get in almost anywhere. And I have to admit, even though we're still doing IPMs virtually, and actually, you know, the surveys I've been doing among people, a lot of them really welcome the ability to do IPMs virtually on an ongoing basis, because they are so much easier to coordinate, and people don't have to travel, and people can social distance. And then for some, you know, prefer to have the hybrid mode. And that presents some challenges. You know, if people have to wear masks in the same office, it makes it harder to hear. It makes it harder to read facial expressions and hear words being said, which then takes me into, I recently have done some on-site training for the Imperial County Office of Education, but also another financial institution. But, you know, because masks were required, we were able to social distance and all of that it really went quite well. So from a training perspective, and people are clamoring to get back in, you know, direct contact with each other. And so that's led to a lot of my research recently about just what does a hybrid workplace look like. And so there are some new ways I'll just put out to everybody, and you can let me know if you're interested in receiving some of the materials. But there are new ways for organizations to rethink the conference room, to rethink positioning of large screen TVs for hybrid placement, even some new technology called the Meeting Owl, which will allow the camera and the audio to track the person speaking. And so I know I put that out to a few school districts who tend to have their parties come in, and I still remain virtual, and, as a tool. And it's not very costly at all. And so that would be a way of, again, rethinking the conference room, not instead of one long table, you're going
Right.
to have more modular setup and having the screen not at the end of the room, but in the middle of the side walls so that you can have more maximum viewing. So a lot of new stuff coming out. So that's another thing to be aware of, track, and particularly, as we do IPMs, but also in how to accommodate people.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it's so interesting because at the county office, the October 15th deadline just happened, and we at the San Diego County Office of Ed, you had to upload your vaccination card into the PeopleSoft system, and then if you are not vaccinated, you obviously you can remain employed, but you've got to test every week, and then your manager has to manage that with HR. And so that process has already started, the testing at the county once a week. But it's interesting, like LA County it's completely different. It's mandatory, and you can't come to work anymore. You have to request an accommodation, as you and I have talked to them for either an underlying medical condition or a deeply held religious belief, or you're not coming to work, whether it's remote or whether it's on person. And then I just got back, as I told you, from New York City,
Right.
which is, wow, I mean, so different than where we are. You cannot go to a store.
Right.
You don't go into anywhere. You have to show your driver's license and your vaccine if you want to go out to eat, if you want to pick up food, if you want to go see a show, if you want to go to Broadway. You're not doing anything without proof of vaccination,
Right.
or you're just not going in at all. And so I got very used to just showing my card everywhere. If you go in and order a drink, you need to show your card. And so they are in a completely different place than and they kept asking me, they said, you don't have to show a vaccination card everywhere you go in California. And I said, no, that's not a requirement.
Yeah.
Where we are, state to state, right? So it depends on where you are. And for our districts, it's the same thing, because some of them have some different policies, some stricter, and it's, some different guidelines.
Right. No, yeah, and that I think makes it challenging to districts, in that there's no, and we're saying this about the work world in general right now, one size does not fit all. And so it's just like the IPM, you have to evaluate things on a case-by-case basis, district by district as well. And, population served and so forth. And so, yeah, quite a lot of variance, that is for sure. Yeah. And so let's go into the our third topic for today, around the IPMs and some of the questions and issues that have come up around settlements and the interactive process. So I'll let you take it from there, and I'll add to it accordingly.
Great. So I get a lot of questions and have a lot of discussion with our members about this. So usually when you have a workers' comp disability, and then you also have permanent work restrictions, what happens, and it's kind of simultaneously, right? That permanent and stationary, or MMI report, it has three things in it that are really important, right? It has the fact that they're permanent and stationary. They're not going to get any better. They're not going to get any worse. They plateaued per the doctor, which means that there's no more work comp temporary disability that's going to be paid, which is significant, right? Because in our world, that means they're starting going through their time a full day at a time, and there's no more work comp benefits coming into play. And then the second thing it does is it rates out their permanent disability for a potential settlement, whether that be with lifetime future medical care open, or whether that's a CNR with closes out everything. Those are the two kinds of settlements, and there's only two in California. And then the third thing it does is outlines very specifically what their permanent work restrictions are, and what those limitations, and whether the doctor thinks that they can go back to work regular duty, or whether they have limitations and they need to be accommodated. Some doctors, which you and I see this all the time, they go beyond that and they determine for the district, oh, they can be accommodated or not. They should not do that. They should never do that. That's always your job to do that in the process. And then the last thing they do, so I guess there's four things. The last thing they do is outline what the lifetime future medical is. And they outline that in detail. That's important, because that's how the examiners kind of evaluate what is that worth, because we turn that into money in our system. We turn the future medical care into a lump sum of money. And if they're Medicare eligible, we have to get an MSA to help us determine, they determine what that medical amount is that we have to set aside. So then you have two things that you're doing, kind of, that you're faced with. You can settle the case because you have a permanent disability rating. And you need to determine if they're not released to full duty work, which most people that have permanent disability are not, right? They have permanent work restrictions. So it's the order of things. And I guess in my perfect world, I would rather that we didn't settle cases where we have not done an IPM and we do not know whether or not they're going to come back to work or not. Even if we think that in the IPM that we're going to offer them a job that they're going to accept and accept a letter offer of return to work, I would prefer if we wait to settle until after the IPM when we've actually held the discussion, because like you and I know, IPMs can go sideways in a lot of different ways. And sometimes when we think they can be accommodated, they can't or they're not. And sometimes when we think they can't, they are. And so how you settle and how you do the IPM, they're interrelated, they're interconnected. So I really think that we should decide the return to work question and then decide whether we're going to settle, how much we're going to settle for, and what type of settlement we're going to do. So sometimes it can't be done that way, but that's what I think is better. We're getting hung up in a lot of situations where we've already settled the case, and now we might bring the person back to work that we've already bought out their lifetime future medical care because we thought they weren't going to return to work for us. And then it turns out that the union and everything kind of goes south and we bring them back to work and we've already bought out their whole claim. So, that's why the order of things, and we have to be careful. And I'm sure you can add your thoughts to this too.
Yeah. Well, it's always been an interesting conundrum. And, having worked in the workers' compensation industry, specifically before the ADA, well versed in what that is. You and I know, we go back way back. But then when the ADA came into play, it did create a lot of confusion. And I happened to be in a position at the time where I was closely involved in analyzing the implications of ADA for workers' comp. And, with attorneys, other rehabilitation industry experts, and then in the next 10 years, working closely with EEOC and a couple other national organizations, that what does this mean, And so I think, and for people who specifically specialize in workers' comp, who may or may not have much familiarity with the ADA, I think it's just important to emphasize, and I think this is what I heard you say, settlement is about the workers' compensation administrative rules and regulations as it applies to a work-related injury. Settlements never trump responsibilities of an employer under the ADA. Would you agree with that?
Yes, right. And I actually think, what I think, the civil penalties in the civil litigation from failure to accommodate and failure to bring people back to work and wrongful termination totally outweigh any kind of litigation that happens in comp. It's just a much more scary litigation. So we really don't recommend doing total buyouts and CNR buyouts until we have finished with our responsibilities of evaluating whether or not we can accommodate in the current position, whether we're going to offer an alternative position. Maybe the employee is going to apply for like a part-time lower position, but they might still work for us. And then we've already totally bought out their claims. So the claims administration people are working on settlement as soon as they get the P&S report, because that's what they're taught to do, settle and close out the claim. But we have a much higher responsibility of making a decision about whether they can come back to work or not. And we kind of need to pump the brakes sometimes on the claims administration until we resolve our issues, especially if we get into the union and we're starting to have conflict about, especially if we've made a decision that we can't accommodate, and we know now that's going sideways. They're going to litigate, or the union's pushing back. We want to hold the settlement decision because sometimes we can work those things kind of together. The interplay is really important, and the timing is really important.
Yeah, absolutely. I just facilitated an IPM just last week, and it was an employer in another county, but they had attended my training from a couple of years ago. And so, and one of the persons was actually in charge of a department, but that's where a lot of injuries occur. And so the employer actually initiated the interactive process before the employee did. And yet the employee had union representation, and somebody I'd met in prior occasions. And he goes, what do you mean we don't have medical documentation? I said, well, there's sort of three ways, that we should be mindful about starting an IPM. Either the employee, reports a medical condition that's impacting their ability to be at work, stay at work, and perform the work, or provides medical documentation. That's one way. Workers' compensation, of course, if it's work-related, workers' comp provides some information about, work status reports, things like that, and so forth. And we want to use those work status reports to look at temporary accommodation, bring them back to work as soon as possible, even though they may not be MMI or PNS. And a lot of employers don't do that either, but huge opportunities to save a lot of money and keep loyalty, as well as facilitate recovery. And the third way is simply if the employer has observations or knowledge, or there's a record of impairment. And in this particular case, the employee had a history of a bilateral condition, and in the last few weeks was reporting increased discomfort and pain, and her doctor actually took her off of work for 2 weeks. And so the director, gosh, is she working safely? The direct threat element under the ADA. And so I explained to the union rep, I said, well, the employer has knowledge and there's a record. And the employee informed her employer that she has a condition that's causing her difficulty. And so the employer had an obligation, a duty to activate the process, even though we don't have medical information. So that's another area people get a little tripped up on is, well, we don't have any medical documentation. Yeah, but you have knowledge. And so based on that knowledge, this is a perfect time to have an IPM and to explore what's going on. And then we can better direct or counsel the employee on the information we need. Because a lot of doctors just don't know, are not aware of this whole, impact on work ability. They're looking at the condition from a medical perspective. And they don't understand the world of work. They don't often have a job description. And so in this one case, she was going back to the doctor actually the next day. So we guided her to take the job description, tell the doctor what you told us today about your high levels of pain. Is it in your best interest to continue working while you're waiting to see about surgery, et cetera, et cetera. And so that was all with union involvement, and we all agreed on that course of action. And so if you're in doubt, it's better to have the interactive process and guide your employee in what's needed, not just demand or request a medical note, because if the doctor's already responded, you're not going to get much more. In fact, you're going to tick off the doctor, quite frankly, Right. And so so that takes us into some of the time, the timing and resistance that we might experience among employees too. And before I switch into that piece of the IPM, I just want to emphasize for our participants too, is that one of the things that has emerged in more recent years is not just the failure to accommodate, but it's now the failure to engage. So there are compliance and penalty issues if you don't even have that conversation with the employee through the interactive process. So always in the civil world, as Felicia has already alluded to, it can be $300,000 per incident fine. So that can add up if you've done a bunch of different things in not following your compliance. And so it's always better to invest a little bit for a huge payoff in what you can avoid. And by having the interactive process, there's so much knowledge gained on both your side as the employer about what's going on for this employee, but also on the part of the employee about the laws involved and their rights and responsibilities, their obligations, as well as the employers, because they have just as many rights and responsibilities, which then takes me into this next piece. If employees are resistant, well, again, there are laws that govern this process. And again, as an employer, you have a duty and obligation to engage the employee. And there's another case from a couple of years ago, I think it was with UPS, where the employee was demanding a specific accommodation, refusing even to consider what her employer was offering. The employer was offering her reasonable accommodations. That's the other thing, is that just because an employee or a doctor recommends the Cadillac, and a Volkswagen will do, but you're not obligated to give the Cadillac. You have a right to explore and evaluate options for accommodation as well. And that's where, it's a negotiation between the employer and employee. And the employee needs to understand, just because you ask doesn't mean you get. we have to evaluate, what's your condition, what are the limitations, what are the essential functions, what are the working conditions, the end output. And so, Felicia, you and I know from a few years back, we worked closely with your JPA counsel.
Mm-hmm.
And together we took a look at, I brought in some of my practices and being the employment law attorney, and she, had done some research. And so it's sort of like the 3 strikes and you're out or in, however you want to take it, but, first notifying the employee and in writing as far as, this is the process, this is what we do for our employees with medical conditions. And, here we're proposing to engage in the interactive process on one of these 3 dates and offer 3 dates and times immediately. But you already have some idea about how cooperative this employee has been, and then also to send it out certified mail, regular mail, and email. Okay. Because some people will take a certified letter, but they won't take won't do the regular mail, but then some will take the regular mail, not realizing what's the same things in the certified mail, and by email too, because we all have it. And then, and if they still don't, and give them a timeline, give a reasonable timeline, and usually that's 10 days. And if they don't respond, saying, okay, we've attempted to meet with you, we're reaching out once again. Here are another, 3 dates and times since the virtual ones have passed. And again, we invite you to come, we invite you with your representation, whatever that might be. And again, if they still don't comply, then, let them know in that second letter that, we'll try this again. And if, if you still choose not to apply or participate, then we will go ahead and meet to evaluate what we do know. We would love to have your participation, your contributions, and yet we will go ahead and decide or meet and confer about whether or not we feel we can accommodate based on available information. You will be notified of our outcomes. So I have 3 letters that are sort of designed for that purpose. But again, the EEOC says you need to give repeated attempts. And that kind of guidance has actually been around since the late 1990s, 2000, when I first encountered this kind of resistance piece. And it really hasn't changed. So, yeah.
And the only thing, and you're right, what I wanted to add to that too is I do get a lot of questions from employers and from our members where they've got 2 different notes from the PTP or the QME or the AME, and they don't align. One of them's a release to return to work full duty and one of them's not, or sometimes they're different limitations, but they're both modified duty. And then the district's like, which one do we follow in the meeting? And I said, both. You've got to look at both of them. And then a lot of them tell me, oh, we're going to wait until the claims team clarifies with both doctors and they agree. And I said, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to meet immediately now to try to resolve the conflict, because the doctors may stay in their current positions. We may never be able to get one note again because you have more than one cook in the kitchen, right? Yeah. Which just is, and you and I both know sometimes the doctors are recalcitrant and they stay in their positions. They're stuck there. And so no, that's not, we don't wait until the claims team, because that could take months to go get a QME supplemental. We don't wait for that. We meet on those 2 different opposing or 3 different opposing notes and try to come to a consensus, either using a mediator such as yourself or on your own. But we don't wait, because that can take a long time. And in the meantime, we might have pay rolling on because one of them's return to work and one of them's not, and we're keeping them out of work, right? So we might have paid leave that's issue, back pay, right?
Yeah. And again, from an EEOC or ADA perspective, they require that we take a look at all available doctors' information. And that's why we need the IPM to sort through that. And the other thing too is that if on the workers' comp side, if they have said PNS or MMI, you've got 60 days to make a decision. Right. And so otherwise you're facing the $6,000, training voucher. And then on the ADA, they also give a 60-day time frame as a reasonable period of time to determine if you can do accommodation. So you work with the available information and make your decisions accordingly. And, and then if information changes, guess what? You might need to come back. But again, investment in IPM is far less than all these other costs and complications that come about. What, $500 versus $6,000? I think I know where I'd invest my money. How about you?
Well, and we had a big district that had two notes that were conflicting, and you guys met and the employee decided to retire. The employee decided, okay, I agree. I don't think I can come back to work. I'm going to retire. And they decided that at the IPM. So you don't actually know where things are going to go. And that was my point about, we don't want to resolve cases in chief or CNR cases when we don't know where we're going with the return to work piece.
Yeah, absolutely. And similar to what you were just saying, we had different information. The employee even disagreed with what her treating doctor said and the QME said. And so I was asked to weigh in to make some decision about the immediacy. And so use some of my guiding principles in terms of temporary accommodation versus long-term accommodation and the conflicting information, even from the employee. This has been going on for 3 years. So I did reach out to defense counsel to see where things going, and was able to recommend a course of action that everybody did agree with, because it was just too murky, quite frankly. And there was all kinds of risk issues, et cetera. So you can see what we cover on Monday Q&A, a lot of information, trying to bring you the latest and greatest about whatever is happening, giving you real-time, real-life examples. And so we invite you to come back again in another month. I have to admit, I don't remember the exact date. I think it's the Monday before the week of Thanksgiving. It might be a little early in November. So, but all of that information will come out in our follow-up email to this event, and along with the recording, along with some other updates that we always try to share with you, and provide you with a link to that article that Felicia and I were talking about with the EEOC. It might be something to have a discussion at your school district about, what does this mean for us? And, have we been misstepping? We didn't even know it, And so, again, thank you so much for being here. Love working with you, Felicia, and love working with the school districts. And for those of you who may not have renewed your non-workers' comp agreements with me for this year, do reach out. I'm working on that now, got a little behind myself last summer, and new certificates of coverage are available, and along with some other great updates and flowcharts. So I'll be sending that out to you. Okay. Thank you so much, Felicia, for spending Monday morning with me.
Oh, it was my pleasure. I always really look forward to it.
Oh, great. And thank you to all of our participants. Happy Monday, happy October, and have a safe and happy Halloween.